Hello and thank you for joining us at Data Cloud Europe 2015 in Monaco. My name's Stephen Pritchard and our guest now is Steve Wallage, who is the Managing Director of BroadGroup Consulting. Steve, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. Over the last few years, you've increased your research into cloud computing in particular. Where's the industry going? What are the highlights and what are the risk factors?
A lot of different issues. We see a lot of data center operators. They see cloud as a great opportunity, whether they'll be an enabler of cloud, a facilitator of cloud, or even a provider of cloud. All different challenges for them. And getting it right is very difficult. There's some very big companies out there. And for a lot of users, again, a different issue. They're all very interested in cloud, what it can do. They love the concept, they love the idea, but quite whether it can meet their expectations and provide what they need today. So a lot of companies, they're doing some things already today, they're looking at other things, but really trying to make it work. And we've certainly seen companies that have used cloud for certain things and it hasn't worked out. So we're already seeing some of that issue with poor performance leading them to go back to a non-cloud environment.
From the vendor side, are you seeing cloud and conventional data center services developing in parallel tracks now?
It's an interesting question. I mean, we're seeing a lot of data centers, they're becoming cloud exchanges. Historically, they were telecom exchanges. A lot of the traffic they now carry is linked to cloud. Some of the providers at our event today, they're seeing around 70% of their deployments in the data center linked to cloud. So the two are complementary in many ways. People talk about where does the cloud sit? Well, it sits in the data center somewhere. But equally as well, we're also seeing that people have to rethink what a data center means in a cloud environment. If we look at the basic principles of cloud around on-demand, elasticity, scalability, in many ways that's not really the way that the data center environments thought in the past. They're having to rethink business models and operational models.
What's attracting businesses to use the cloud and what's attracting CIOs in particular to choose that platform?
Well, we've seen a number of trends coming together. One of the things that we've seen a lot in our recent research is a lot of CIOs and IT departments. They've drastically reduced the number of staff they have in-house and they're looking at how they use IT sensibly. It's not just cloud versus non-cloud, it's, let's have a look at how we as a business use the internet, how we can use cloud, how we use our IT budget. And of course what that means often is that budget is moving to other departments such as marketing and strategy. And so they're thinking probably that budget's not really increasing. We don't want to do so much in-house, we want to look at outsourcing, we want to look at getting more bang for our buck. So what can we do to make the business better? And then the secondary thing is how could IT and indeed the cloud support that requirement?
So there's a definite shift, although IT spending or the spending on IT may be increasing overall, spending within the IT department could be static or even falling.
Yes, absolutely, and indeed, in as much as people can always measure it, they're looking to reduce that spend and what they can do to get more return on that investment and look very carefully about what that investment may mean. And I think often they see cloud as a very good way of getting the sort of scalability, the sort of flexibility. And indeed, of course, one of the things that they really get very attracted by is this isn't just about cost, it's about revenue. Can they make more money, not just spend less money?
Well, with that in mind, what's the best practice? What's the current thinking around the way to identify the correct platform for your IT services as a business? What should CIOs be looking at?
It's a very interesting debate, and one of the things around a newish market like cloud is many of these things aren't really thought through and people would have very different opinions. If we look at the event today, we could have 10 different experts and get 10 very different views. I think what's very interesting from our event is we speak to and have a lot of CIOs speaking. And we have a lot of people in the audience saying, well, I'm going to look at their lessons. What worked, what didn't work, what's the real life examples. Of course, the vendors will tell us all these things are great and all these things work without a problem. But let's hear it from someone who's actually had it in operation for 6-12 months, who's actually gone through the integration pain, who's actually needed to serve their customers in real time in 24/7. So they want to see real life applications, they want to see real life examples. And I think people are fairly flexible about how it might work. There's no great, this has to be the way. Maybe AWS works in many ways, maybe some private cloud, maybe some things don't work in a cloud environment. People are looking at different options. There isn't that view that one size fits all by any means.
Integration is certainly key, and a lot of the vendors are talking about hybrid clouds, best of both in some ways. The other question that seems to come up at events like this, though, is the question of measurement. and both in terms of the environmental measurements and the standards, which are very critical in the data center business, but also the measurement of performance and the KPIs that a business needs to look at to understand whether a cloud provider or indeed a data center operator is actually a good one. Do you think we've made any progress in that over the last few years?
It has been a difficult area. I think you've got two major issues. One is, what do you actually measure? And then it's who measures it and how they measure it. And particularly on that latter issue, there's very few independent checks. And if we look at the data center industry for a moment, some of the measurements and metrics in the industry, like PUE, the power usage, it's been a much misused and abused term, and people effectively measure themselves. They use different measurements and characteristics. So it becomes a somewhat, useless tool for end users and others in the industry. And that becomes the problem. What are you actually measuring? How are you measuring it? Who's checking this to make sure that there's standardization and quality in what they do?
And of course, a performance measure for a marketing department may be very different to a performance measure for a conventional IT department.
Absolutely, and of course the IT department typically has measures like MIPS and IOPS and looks very much performance. What the marketing and rest of the business really cares about, what it does. They don't really care how it does it, it's what it actually does. So what that actually means in terms of business performance, on the return on investment, on what it can actually do for their day-to-day business.
Very much so. So just thinking forward to 2016 now, what do you think the key trends will be over the remainder of the year, and what sort of things should in particular CIOs and CTOs be looking out for?
It's a very interesting debate about how the market might develop. I've chaired a number of panels at our event today with CIOs and CEOs of companies. And I ask them actually that question typically at the end of our sessions. And often there's somewhat of a sense that things will carry on as they are. One of the things from the data center industry is they've often had different challenges, different technology issues, and they don't tend to affect the market too much. In reality, people still look at reliability, people still look at scalability, people still look at what requirements are needed for their business. And so there's a little bit of a sense from the industry itself that things don't change too quickly. I think that's a somewhat dangerous assumption. We're seeing a lot of things that are quite radically looking to integrate and change the marketplace. And for example, the whole issue of quite where cloud fits in. At the moment, data centers and cloud somewhat coexist, but as people really start to develop new infrastructures and have new expectations of what that requires, that will start to make some real changes. So people will look at what that IT infrastructure will look like, they will look at what the applications and performance, they'll look much more closely about that return on investment and business issue. So I think that there's going to be some quite big challenges for some of the players in the industry to try and adapt to those changes.
Well, Steve Wallage from BroadGroup, thank you very much.
Thank you.